Discover the expert insights that transform the financing strategies with the founder and CEO of AirTight Management with Bob Norton. Uncover essential tips on bootstrapping, competitive intelligence, and market research that can propel your business growth to new heights. Unlock the power of expert consultation and refocus your business goals with Bob Norton, the go-to expert for scaling your business. Elevate your business acumen with nuggets of wisdom and valuable insights that can revolutionize your approach to business expansion. Join the ranks of satisfied clients who recommend Bob Norton for his unparalleled expertise in business growth and scaling strategies.
It's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you Bob Norton from AirTight Management. Bob, glad to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here and looking forward to a nice interview.
So let's get started. I wonder if you might share a little bit more about who you are and what your business is.
Yeah, I mean, the short version of my background is I spent 8 years as a technologist. I was one of the founders of what today is Thomson Reuters. Back then, in a previous life, it was called Thomson Financial Services, which was very successful. And I was in charge of all product development there as vice president of engineering and chief technical officer. And I really cut my teeth generating products, ran the Skunk Works and generated 5 products in 5 years, all of which became very successful. A couple of them even became, essentially worldwide global monopolies in their space, called First Call. Autex, which is a block trading system. At one point, I was told about 97% of transactions on Wall Street went through one of our systems there. So it was a very successful time for me in my first exit. And I took the money from that and I began founding companies. And for 14 years, I was a serial entrepreneur. I founded 4 different companies, all of which exited during that 14 years and returned over $1 billion in profits to my investors, raised about 40 million in capital for my own companies, and over the years helping other companies, I've raised over $1 billion now. And so that was for 14 years and 4 exits. And then in 2002, I started advising and consulting for companies. So for a little over 20 years now, I've been building up intellectual property and practicing management consulting, and organizational development and organizational change management are the 3 things big companies would call it, though it's mostly for smaller companies. I've worked with a lot of startups launching products and companies, but essentially I spend most of my time today helping companies scale and really helping them learn to install all the systems and processes needed, which Jim Collins of Good to Great says takes about 8 to 10 years for the average company to figure out. And our value proposition is we help reduce that time down to about 1 year for companies that have reached product market fit. So, over 35 years experience, 30 of that or almost 30 as a CEO, and about 8 as a technologist.
I'm curious, with all that experience and the things that you've done, I wonder if you might be able to share stories, somebody that's received tremendous value by working with you. What would that be?
We've worked with many companies, and we have actually a unique program because we promise and guarantee to add millions of dollars to the valuation of those companies. So one case study that I did was with a medical scanning clinic that had 3 locations when I started working with them, and helped them get by the barriers that were holding them back to expand. We basically doubled the value of the business in a short time, and now that's been several years ago, so it's probably tripled by now. So we added well over $30 million to the valuation of the business by breaking through the limitations that business and that founder to some degree had, because he didn't realize how big the market was and what else he could do to scale. So we do that by training, coaching, and consulting. It's a hybrid of that. And a lot of people know that training alone often doesn't have the kind of impact you expect it to have. You go to the training session and you put the manual back on the bookshelf when you come back, and a lot of it never gets implemented. But when you combine that with coaching, it tends to stick, not only because it's becoming a habit by using it, but also because you're there to do the customization of implementation and whatever's different about that business. And 80 or 90% of this stuff is the same for every business, and it's industry agnostic. The industry doesn't matter. But the reality is that you've got to get in the habit of doing it, and people need that extra help one-on-one to adapt the principles to their situation. We teach thousands of best practices and principles that I've curated over the 30 plus years of my career from over 1,000 books. And most companies don't know and certainly don't implement these principles. And that's really the difference between, serious market leaders that tend to innovate a lot and dominate their markets. And those that don't. So that was an engagement. I think it lasted 14 months. We built the management team. We trained and coached the team to use all these professional best practices, and they went from I think historically they had about 15% growth. And we got them to 35 or 40% growth after a year, and I think more than that after a while. And ultimately, they got a large buyout offer from a private equity firm, and I don't think they've actually taken that. They've let their equity compound, and the founder is at retirement age, so I'm sure he'll sell out for $100 million or some nine-figure sum in the not too distant future. So that was a great experience, and it's not atypical as long as the company is willing to make the commitment to work on themselves and implement all the best practices that we have put in our video training platform, which has 500 videos. Of course, everyone isn't going to watch all of those. They're going to be targeted for the things that individual management team members need to really move to be A players and up level the team.
To this, I'm wondering if you might share a little bit more specifically, who is your ideal client at this time, Bob?
Yeah, we work with companies that have already reached some amount of product market fit. So typically they're not raw startups, although we have training at entrepreneurshipu.com for that with certifications for management and strategy and marketing and scaling. But as I said, the education alone isn't really recommended. So when a company reaches about $1 million in sales, that's the best time to bring us in, because that's when they're really having to do the things that most people don't know how to do. Scaling is a very rare skill. Everyone knows that 80% of startups fail, but what they tend not to know is that only 1 in 400 companies will ever reach 10 million in sales, and only about 1 in 6,300 companies will ever reach 100 million in sales, which I did twice in a row in my serial entrepreneur phase with my company. So I'm either the luckiest guy in the world, or I sort of got the scaling thing figured out pretty well. So that's the problem you don't know you don't have is the one you don't work on solving, and sometimes the one that can bite you the hardest.
Well, I'm wondering if there's some thoughts or ideas or anything that you'd like to share your screen that would give us a better idea of what the value that you bring.
Jim Collins is probably the best business author of our generation. I think most people that are serious about management science have read Good to Great and maybe Built to Last, but he also has a number of other books. I was communicating with his office this past week, and he's got another one coming out shortly. I'm not sure of the title. But one of the conclusions that's often forgot that came from his earliest and I think most famous book, Good to Great, was that it took an average of 8 to 10 years for the average great company in his study. I forget the exact number, but it was over 200 companies that he studied for that book to put together the data on what made companies great. And the conclusion that it took 10 to up to 10 years and 8 on a low side for those companies to, quote, become great companies and figure out all the internal systems is the problem we solve. Basically, we have built 6 generic systems that create a framework for success that we can drop in and train and coach. And of course, consulting is the design and the project management, as well as making sure that it's implemented successfully and making adjustments as you go. So we do everything necessary to make that happen and get the company doing everything it should. So one of the conclusions he came with that I think is the most important, for positive thinking as well as just factual knowledge is you can grow as fast as you want if you have the right team, which is number one, and the right planning and systems, which are, probably number two and three. And so any company can really become $1 billion company. And I mean that literally, that's not hyperbole, because a company is just a legal entity that you put products and services into. And so if you have an innovative culture and you build a good team, and by that I mean the senior management team, where you're going to invest the most and try to have the best people. Of course, you want everyone else to be, good players too, but you're working against the odds, and everyone can't be an A player, down to the lowest level in the business, but you hire as many good people as you can. But these are the top 10 specific outcomes that we try to get: team alignment for perfect communications, accountability, and trust. We actually call the perfect culture a Darwinian meritocracy. And if you think about that term, there's a lot of meaning in that. I think that everyone that has a lot of experience in management and leadership, essentially converges on the same beliefs, that you need transparency and high levels of communication. And of course, the Darwinian part is evolving and it's being adaptable given the changing circumstances in the market and the global economic situation and every other variable out there. And of course, capital is attracted by having high barriers to entry. Some people call it an unfair competitive advantage, or your secret sauce. But whatever it is, it has to have some sustainability and be protectable in time. And so this is our six systems. Strategic planning, which you can argue is probably the most complex process in the business, because it involves all of the disciplines: sales, marketing, finance, product development, operations, the legal issues, raising capital, human resources, et cetera, et cetera. And so to have a complete vision, you have to go through a strategic planning process. And of course, we take a teach to fish approach. So as we're going through installing this system, we're teaching the management team to do that strategic planning process. And from that, they're going to get the superior vision, a superior strategy, and they're going to have a cadence of long-term planning, that might need to be adjusted a little bit every quarter, and it's certainly updated once a year. The second system is management best practices, or we call it PAMS for short, which stands for Performance, Accountability, and Merit System. And that's your performance management system. It's a collection of best practices from 75 years of management science. And it gets the discipline that Jim Collins talks about into a management team by having your operations do all the right thing and focusing management on what it should be doing. And we teach 5 styles of management there that every manager should know, because management is situational. And we try to get collaborative and contributive management for companies that reach 10, 15, 20 people. Then we install dashboard metrics, and that's running a business by the numbers. It changes everything and gives managers a lot more scope and a lot more leverage. But you've got to have the right KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators, that are specific to the business and the industry, and also tied into that strategic plan that we already talked about. The fourth system is what we call Skunk Works innovation, and that's the cultural need to innovate and to use creativity to listen to your customers and both launch new iterations or product extensions and new products. So that's a whole framework. We're figuring out where to invest new monies and where to expand products, add new markets. it's sort of the process of doing a startup internally in a larger company, which some people call intrapreneurship. The fifth system is process management, very important for companies to capture their institutional knowledge, build training that's specific to themselves, use Kaizen, which is the same as constant and never-ending improvement, the other acronym for that, CANI, which is constantly updating as new information comes in from the marketplace, from customers, and as new technologies evolve so that you're not leapfrogged by competitors. And of course, doing process management to make sure that there's documentation, training, and ownership of processes so they evolve and use the experience of new people coming into the business as well. And lastly, the last system would drop in, and we'll take about 6 to 8 weeks to install each of these systems, which is why it's a 1 year process for the whole program. But the last system we call HCAD for short, Human Capital Acquisition and Development, and that's really controlling your culture, creating a high performance culture, best practices in recruiting and retention, having a learning and development program. Research recently shows that about 75% of employees want to have on-the-job training to enhance their professional skills. And the research also shows that in management is where it's falling down. Sort of companies expect managers to already know management, but the reality is even the best Ivy League business schools don't teach the art of management. You must learn it experientially, and there's a lot that goes well beyond. So I always recommend that managers are constantly learning and constantly reading. In my early days as a manager, I read 4 to 6 books a month and audio books, listening to them on the way to and from work and the commute and all that sort of stuff. So constant learning is very important. And that's why we have the 500 videos, which is a cornerstone for training and up-leveling management to professional best practices. And then most people call this organizational development or organizational change management. So ultimately, this is what will happen. The outcomes are team alignment, raising capital easier at higher stock prices, attracting and retaining a top team. You've got to, if you're going to scale rapidly, and by scaling, I mean growing at 30% or more, and typically we will get our clients to 50% compound annual growth rate, and maybe 100 if it's a compelling opportunity with a lot of differentiation and sustainable competitive advantage. That becomes a catch-22 if you don't have those. But if you do have them, you can attract more capital, which of course allows you to spend more on R&D or new product development, as well as marketing and sales to scale the business. We generate more innovation by instilling that in the culture. And we typically are going to try to 8x at least the value of the business in 2 to 3 years. And that might sound like hyperbole or exaggeration, but it's not, because if you double sales and you double the growth rate and you double the price to earnings ratio, those are multiplicative. And so you've 8x'd the value of the business. So we work on all of those variables or levers in the business, and given time, 2 to 3 or 5 years, in 5 years, you can have a 32x or a 64x of the value of the business. That's just the math of compounding. If you do the math, 50% annual growth for 5 years is 32 times, and 100% growth for 5 years is 64 times the value of the business. So this is the cycle that we will go through 6 times to install each of these generic 6 systems, customize it, and then do the training and coaching that's necessary to implement it and really make it stick. The book Reengineering the Organization talks about organizational transformation or reengineering failing about 80% of the time. And I'm a big believer, and have been screaming from the top of mountains for well over a decade, that you can get 100% success rate if you combine and have the same philosophy in your training and your coaching and consulting. And when you do those three things in a holistic, integrated way, you should have 100% success. That doesn't mean you're going to accomplish everything you want to achieve, especially if your goals are unrealistic. But what it does mean is you're going to get a huge boost in the value of that
If
business.
somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, we take direct phone calls, and we like to do that. We do diagnoses on the phone, and we'll guide you to the right services. We actually have a lot of free models and training and videos in our YouTube channel, but our phone number is 619 scale 06. And our main website is airtightgrowth.com. That's AIRTIGHT and growth.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Bob. And I appreciate our time together, and enjoy your day.
Thanks very much.